everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We're really switching gears today, diving into the fascinating world of, money. But not just the numbers and cents, the spreadsheets and interest rates. We're talking about the psychology of it all with Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
Yeah, such a good one. This book really flips the script on how we think about finances. It's not just about what you know about investing, but how you think about money. Your behavior, your emotions, your own personal money story. That's the real game changer.
So it's less about becoming some kind of Wall Street whiz and more about, knowing yourself.
Exactly. And Housel really brings this idea to life with some compelling stories.
Yeah.
Like take Ronald Reed, for instance.
Okay.
He lived a remarkably frugal life, worked as a janitor.
A janitor.
You got it. But get this, through quiet, disciplined investing, he amassed an $8 million fortune.
Wow, talk about under the radar.
Right. And on the flip side, you have someone like Richard Fuscone, a Harvard MBA, top executive. You'd think he'd have it all figured out, right?
Yeah, sounds like someone who'd be good with money.
Well, he ended up bankrupt after the 2008 financial crisis. So Housel uses these contrasting stories, these really different paths, to hammer home a really powerful point. It's not about how much you make, it's about the choices you make with what you have.
Okay, so behavior trumps book smarts when it comes to building wealth, huh? That's honestly a little bit of a relief to hear. But where do we even start? How do we unravel our own, maybe sometimes kind of messy money psychology?
Well, Housel dives into this idea that our personal experiences, often going all the way back to childhood, shape our financial beliefs way more than we realize. He uses Bill Gates as a really interesting example. So think about this back in the 1960s. As a teenager, Gates had access to a computer. That was practically unheard of.
Right, like finding a unicorn back then?
Absolutely. And that lucky break, huge part in him co-founding Microsoft, right?
Yeah, you could say that was a pretty pivotal moment.
So now think about your own life, your own upbringing. Did money feel scarce growing up? Were you taught to save every penny, or was it more about enjoying the moment?
Oh, yeah.
All these early experiences, they create a kind of money script that we often still operate from as adults, whether we realize it or not. Recognizing your own script. That's the first step to rewriting it, to making more conscious financial choices.
Okay, so acknowledging those beliefs we've internalized over the years is huge. But how do we actually go from understanding our money psychology to, applying it, making it work for us?
That's where the power of compounding comes into play.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this, Housel points to, the one and only Warren Buffett.
The Oracle of Omaha?
Exactly. Now, Buffett's obviously an incredibly savvy investor, but a lesser-known factor in his success is this. He started investing when he was just 10 years old.
Wow, talk about an early bird.
Right. And those extra years of compounding, they've made a world of difference. To really drive this point home, Housel compares Buffett to Jim Simons, a hedge fund wizard who, get this, actually had higher average returns than Buffett.
Whoa, seriously? Higher than Buffett?
So why isn't Simons swimming in a vault of gold like Buffett?
He started later in life. Simon's fund compounded at an astounding 66% annually. To put that in perspective, that's more than triple Buffett's average returns. But because he got a later start, he hasn't had as much time for those gains to really snowball.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's not always about getting those crazy high returns. It's about time in the market.
Exactly. It really highlights how those early years of investing, even with smaller amounts, can have a massive impact down the road. Time is your best friend when it comes to investing.
So the takeaway here is start early, even if it's just a small amount.
You got it. Time is your greatest asset. The sooner you start, even with a little, the more time your money has to grow exponentially. Those small, consistent contributions, they can really add up to something huge over time. It's like the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
Exactly.
But, Housel doesn't just talk about getting rich. He also dives into this idea of staying wealthy, which I think is something a lot of people maybe don't think about as much.
Yeah.
And he uses these cautionary tales of investors, these legendary figures who made and lost fortunes, to really illustrate this point, right? Like Jesse Livermore, this Wall Street trader.
Oh, Jesse Livermore. Yeah, his story it's a wild one. I mean, we're talking about a guy who made millions, lost millions, multiple times over.
Oh, wow.
And ultimately ended up, taking his own life.
Oh, man.
It's a pretty stark reminder that even the most brilliant investors, right, people who clearly had a knack for the markets, can still be undone by, their own psychology, their own inability to manage risk.
So, I mean, what went wrong there? Was it just bad luck? Or were there some, like, deeper issues at play?
Well, Housel argues that it was really Livermore's inability to manage risk. He was incredible at riding market waves, spotting opportunities, but he really struggled to protect his winnings when the tide turned, which it inevitably does.
Right.
So it's a good reminder that staying wealthy, it's not just about chasing those big wins. It's about, not losing it all. It's about playing defense as much as offense.
It's like that classic saying, slow and steady wins the race.
Exactly.
Right.
Don't get too greedy.
Now, on the flip side of that, Housel also talks about this idea of, enough. And he shares this anecdote about John Bogle,
Okay.
founder of Vanguard. And Bogle was once asked about this billionaire who made more in a single day than Bogle had in his entire life.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm curious what he say.
Bogle's response: that's because he wants it all.
And I think that really gets to the heart of where we can sometimes get tripped up with money, right? If we don't define what enough is for ourselves, we can end up on this hedonic treadmill, constantly striving for more and more and more, never really feeling satisfied.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, especially, nowadays with social media, with everyone comparing themselves to, the highlight reel of everyone else's life. But how do we break free from that?
Well, I think it starts with consciously defining your own version of enough. What does financial security actually look like for you? At what point can you say, I have enough, I feel content, I can now focus on the things that truly matter beyond just accumulating more wealth?
Yeah, it's about aligning your financial goals with your values, with your life goals.
Exactly.
Now, Housel also talks about this concept of the price of returns, and he uses this great analogy of an amusement park.
Well, I like this one.
Yeah, so you have to pay to get into the park, right?
Right.
That price of admission, that gets you access to all the rides, the experiences, the fun, right?
Right.
And investing is kind of similar, right? You're paying the price of volatility, of uncertainty, for the potential of those bigger returns, those long-term gains.
You got it. You're paying for the rides, you're paying for the roller coaster.
So you need to kind of be okay with those ups and downs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's part of the deal. It's the price of admission for those potentially higher returns.
Exactly. And understanding that price, that can really help you, stay the course when the market inevitably dips, because that volatility, it's just part of the deal. It's not a reason to panic.
Don't get off the roller coaster midway through.
Now, all of this ties into another really important point that Housel makes, which is the media's tendency to really focus on, negative financial news.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's like every other headline is about some impending financial crisis.
Right, it's doom and gloom.
Yeah, but is that really an accurate reflection of reality?
Not always. And to illustrate this, Housel uses this really interesting analogy of, imagine an alien observing Times Square, first in 2007, right before the financial crisis hit, and then again in 2009 at the height of the crisis.
Okay.
Now, while the underlying economy, the fundamentals, they hadn't really changed that drastically in those 2 years. The narrative had shifted completely.
Yeah, it was pre-recession optimism and then bam, full-blown panic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And those narratives, they have a huge impact on our behavior, on how we invest, how we spend, how we feel about our own financial security. So we need to be really aware of that negativity bias in the media and really ground ourselves in the facts, in the data, not just, those fear-mongering headlines.
So it's not about burying your head in the sand, right?
Okay.
It's about staying informed, but also being really discerning about where you're getting your information from.
Exactly. Don't let those headlines dictate your decisions,
It's about taking a step back, I guess.
Absolutely.
And thinking for yourself. Now, speaking of, trying to predict the future, Housel also reminds us that, even the smartest experts, they often get it wrong.
Oh, yeah. This is a humbling one for sure.
He uses this example of the Wright brothers.
Oh, I love that story.
Right. So many people thought they were absolutely crazy for even trying to build a flying machine, right?
It just seemed impossible at the time.
Exactly. And I think it just highlights how difficult it is to predict the future, especially in fields that are being driven by innovation and, constant disruption. Like, we can look at all the data in the world, right? We can crunch all the numbers, but sometimes things just unfold in ways that we never could have predicted.
Absolutely.
So what's the takeaway there? We should be wary of anyone who claims to have a crystal ball.
Exactly. Instead of trying to, time the market or predict the next big thing, focus on building a sound investment strategy that can weather different market conditions, right?
Yeah.
Think long-term, think diversification, and focus on what you can control.
So it's less about being right and more about being prepared.
Exactly.
Okay, now, before we move on, there's one more concept that I really wanted to touch on that I found so intriguing. This idea of wealth is what you don't see.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he tells that story about his time working as a car valet,
Yes.
right? He noticed that the people driving the flashiest, most expensive cars, they weren't always the wealthiest.
Right, right.
In fact, they were often the ones who were the deepest in debt,
Yeah.
using those material possessions to project this image of success.
It's like keeping up with the Joneses syndrome, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a recipe for disaster. True wealth, it's often hidden. It's not about the outward show of money. It's about the financial security you've built.
It's about the peace of mind,
Exactly.
not the fancy car.
It's about having options and freedom, not just, stuff.
Yeah, it's a really powerful shift in perspective. It's not about the outward appearance of wealth. It's about, like you said, that peace of mind and the options it provides.
Okay.
So where do we even begin? How do we build that healthier, more, I guess, mindful relationship with money that Housel talks about?
Well, he really stresses this idea of defining what enough means to you. Like, really think about what's that financial finish line that truly aligns with your values, with the life you want to live, and not just what, society tells you to chase after.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to get caught up in that comparison game, right? You're always striving for more, never feeling truly content with what you have.
It's that old saying, comparison is the thief of joy. Right? You're so busy looking at what everyone else has, you forget to appreciate what's right in front of you.
So true. And Housel actually tells this great story about John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard. So Bogle's at this event, right? And someone asks him about this billionaire who made more in a single day than Bogle had in his entire life.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I remember this one. What'd he say?
Bogle just smiles and says, that's because he wants it all. It's this idea that even with unimaginable wealth, right? Billions and billions of dollars, you can still feel like you're behind if you haven't defined your own finish line, if you're constantly chasing after more, more, more.
It's like that finish line keeps moving further and further away, no matter how fast you run.
Exactly.
And I think defining your own version of enough, that can be incredibly freeing. It allows you to make these conscious choices about how you spend your time, your energy, your resources. It's about aligning your financial goals with your values.
It's about asking yourself, what really matters to me?
Right.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a little bit, Housel also talks about the importance of, embracing risk.
Yeah, but being smart about it.
Right, exactly. And he makes this distinction between, I guess what he calls acceptable risk and then ruinous risk.
Right.
Can you, unpack that a little bit? What's the difference there?
Sure. It all comes down to understanding your risk tolerance.
Yeah.
So taking calculated risks, right?
Yeah.
That's part of growth. It's how we learn. It's how we can potentially earn those higher returns. But we also want to avoid those, bet the farm scenarios that can completely wipe us out financially.
Right. It's like that classic saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Diversifying your investments, it's key. And it's not just about spreading your money around. It's about diversifying your time horizon as well.
So what does that look like practically?
Think of it like this. You have some money that's accessible for your short-term needs, right? Emergencies, maybe a down payment on a house, whatever it might be. And then you have another portion of your money that's invested for the long term, for retirement, for example.
Okay, so you're not constantly stressing about every little market dip.
Right. That long-term money, it can ride out those natural market fluctuations because you don't need to touch it for years, maybe even decades.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, one of my favorite parts of the book is where Housel talks about this, paradox of progress, where, objectively speaking, the world has gotten so much better in countless ways, right? We're living longer, healthier lives. We have access to technology that, would have seemed like magic a few decades ago, and yet we still tend to focus on the negative.
Yeah, it's like that negativity bias is just ingrained in our DNA.
Totally. It's that, oh, the sky is falling mentality. And it's so easy to get swept up in that fear, especially with, the 24/7 news cycle and all the negativity that's constantly being thrown at us. But it's so important to step back and look at the bigger picture.
To ground yourself in the facts.
Exactly.
Because, as humans, we tend to overestimate the likelihood of bad things happening and underestimate the likelihood of good things happening.
It's like we're hardwired to focus on the negative.
Right. It's probably some leftover survival mechanism from our caveman days.
Yeah. Back when, seeing a saber-toothed tiger was a daily threat.
Exactly. But the problem is that negativity bias, it doesn't always serve us well in the modern world, especially when it comes to our finances.
So how do we combat that? How do we like retrain our brains to be a little bit more optimistic, a little bit more grounded in like in reality?
Well, for starters, I think it's about being really mindful of where you're getting your information from. If you're constantly bombarded with negativity, it's going to warp your perspective.
Yeah.
So be discerning about what you read, what you watch, who you follow on social media.
It's about being informed but not overwhelmed.
Exactly. And I think it's also about consciously focusing on the positive.
Yeah.
Practice gratitude, celebrate your wins, however small they might seem. Because when you shift your focus to the good, it actually changes your brain chemistry.
Wow. So it's like we can actually train our brains to be more optimistic.
Exactly. And that can have a huge impact on not just your financial well-being, but your overall happiness.
That's such a powerful message.
And, on a more practical level, it's also about educating yourself about money, about investing, about how the markets actually work. Because when you have that knowledge, you're less likely to be swayed by fear-based narratives.
It's about empowering yourself.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power.
I love that. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. This has been such an insightful conversation, and I really think that, The Psychology of Money is one of those books that everyone can benefit from, no matter where they are on their financial journey.
I completely agree. It's not just a finance book. It's a book about human behavior, about understanding yourself, about making choices that align with your values, and ultimately about living a richer, more fulfilling life.
And on that note, for our listeners, we'll leave you with this final thought. If money were no object, how would you spend your time? What brings you joy? What impact do you want to make on the world? Because those answers, they might just hold the key to unlocking your own personal definition of financial freedom and living a life that's truly aligned with what matters most to you. Until next time.